I'm Sarah, 32 years old. After losing my firefighter husband to a drunk driver, I moved in with my parents, thinking they were helping me and my daughter heal. But one October evening, I found Lily sitting on the porch with a suitcase. My parents had cleared her room for my brother's baby. What I uncovered next wasn't just favoritism. It was a $400,000 betrayal that nearly cost me everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And truly, thank you for being here. 2 years ago, my entire world collapsed in a single phone call from the principal of the elementary school where I teach 3rd grade. I was grading papers when she walked into my classroom with that look. You know the one. The look that tells you your life is about to split into before and after. "Sarah, you need to get to St. Mary's Hospital right now," she said. And I knew from her voice that whatever waited for me there would change everything forever. My husband Mike, who was a firefighter with the Portland Fire Department for 8 years, had been rushing to the hospital for an emergency call when a drunk driver ran a red light at 60 miles per hour. The impact killed him instantly, and at 30 years old, the man who had been my whole world for 12 years was gone, leaving me and our daughter Lily without the person who had been our anchor, our joy, our sense of safety in an uncertain world. Mike wasn't just my husband. He was my best friend, my co-parent, and honestly, the stronger one between us when it came to handling life's challenges. He was the one who knew how to fix Lily's bike when the chain came off, who made the best chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings while dancing around the kitchen to make her laugh, and who could calm our daughter's nightmares just by singing her favorite lullaby in his deep, gentle voice. I'm a 3rd grade teacher, which means I'm good with kids in a classroom setting. But Mike had this natural ease with Lily that I sometimes envied. He never seemed to doubt himself as a parent the way I constantly did. The funeral was a blur of flowers and casseroles and people telling me how sorry they were. But what I remember most clearly was 8-year-old Lily standing next to me in her black dress, holding my hand so tightly I thought she might break my fingers. She hadn't cried once since the moment we told her about Daddy, and she just went quiet in a way that scared me more than sobbing would have. After the funeral, when the last of the visitors had gone home and it was just Lily and me in our suddenly too quiet house, the paperwork began. Mike had been diligent about life insurance because firefighters understand risk better than most people, and between his department policy and the personal policy we'd taken out when Lily was born, I found myself looking at a check for $500,000. It felt obscene, putting a price on Mike's life like that. But I knew he'd done it to protect us, to make sure we'd never have to worry about money if something happened to him. That's when my parents, Robert and Patricia Thompson, stepped in with what seemed like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "Honey, you can't stay in that house with all those memories," my mother said, rubbing my back as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at bank statements I couldn't focus on through my tears. "Come home to us, where you belong, where we can take care of you and Lily the way families should." My father nodded firmly, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he'd always used when making important family decisions. "Family takes care of family, Sarah, and you and Lily belong with us right now while you heal from this tragedy." I was drowning in grief and had no idea how to be a single parent, how to make decisions without Mike's input, how to comfort Lily when I could barely function myself. The house Mike and I had bought felt too big and too empty, with every corner holding memories that made my chest tight and my breathing shallow. So when my parents offered their home, the house I'd grown up in, where I'd felt safe as a child, it felt like the first solid ground I'd had since that phone call. But even as I accepted their help, part of me remembered how life had been in that house when I was young, how different things had always been for me compared to my older brother Ryan. Ryan was 4 years older than me and had always been the golden child, star quarterback in high school, full scholarship to college, and now a successful contractor with his own business and beautiful house. Growing up in that house, the pattern of favoritism was so constant it became like wallpaper, present in every room but so familiar you stopped noticing it after a while. Ryan's achievements were celebrated with family dinners and photo albums, while my honor roll certificates were stuck to the refrigerator with barely a comment before disappearing under grocery lists and appointment reminders. When Ryan scored the winning touchdown at homecoming, my parents threw a party and invited half the neighborhood to celebrate their golden boy. When I won the district spelling bee 3 years later, my mother said, "That's nice, sweetheart," and asked me to set the table for dinner. The inequality wasn't subtle, but it was so normalized that I learned to accept it as the natural order of things. Ryan deserved celebration, and I deserved whatever attention was left over. When Ryan needed a car for his 16th birthday, our parents bought him a brand new red pickup truck with all the bells and whistles, complete with a bow on top and a photo session that filled an entire scrapbook page. When I turned 16 2 years later, they handed me the keys to Ryan's old beat-up Honda with a dented bumper and a broken radio, telling me I should be grateful for reliable transportation and that it built character to work with what you had. The same pattern played out with college. Ryan's full scholarship was celebrated like he'd won the Nobel Prize, while my academic scholarship to the state university was mentioned in passing during one family dinner. Even my wedding to Mike was overshadowed because Ryan chose that same month to announce his engagement to Jessica. And somehow his engagement party ended up being the family event that got all the planning attention and financial investment. The pattern was so ingrained that I'd learned not to expect equal treatment, to be satisfied with whatever attention was left over after Ryan's needs were met. I told myself it was because he was older, because boys needed different support, because my parents were just proud of his athletic achievements and business success. I made excuses for them, even as I felt the familiar sting of being the afterthought child, the one whose accomplishments were nice, but not remarkable enough to warrant real celebration or investment. But now, at 32 years old and facing the worst crisis of my life, I desperately needed to believe that their offer of support came from genuine love rather than convenience or obligation. We moved in 3 weeks after the funeral, and my parents seemed genuinely eager to help us heal from our devastating loss. They converted my old bedroom for me, complete with fresh paint and new curtains, setting up the guest room for Lily with some of her favorite stuffed animals and a small desk where she could do homework undisturbed. They were patient when Lily had nightmares about Daddy not coming home, taking turns sitting with her in the middle of the night when she woke up crying for the father who would never again sing her to sleep. They didn't comment when I broke down doing laundry because Mike's shirt still smelled like his cologne, and they took over cooking dinner when I couldn't manage to feed myself properly, let alone care for my daughter's nutritional needs. For the first few months, I genuinely thought we might actually heal there, surrounded by family who seemed to understand the depth of our pain and loss. Ryan was supportive too, in his own way, which surprised me because we'd never been particularly close growing up. The 4-year age gap and his status as the favored child had created a distance between us that we'd never really bridged as adults. He was married to Jessica, a successful real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties, and they'd been trying to have children for years without success, going through multiple rounds of fertility treatments that had put both emotional and financial strain on their marriage. During those early months after Mike died, Ryan was surprisingly gentle with both me and Lily, even offering to help with repairs around my old house when I was emotionally ready to put it on the market. "Take all the time you need to grieve," he'd tell me when I struggled to get through a conversation without breaking down, his voice softer and more compassionate than I'd ever heard it in our decades as siblings. "We're all here for you, and there's no timeline for healing from something like this." I thought I was so incredibly lucky to have such a supportive family during the darkest period of my life, people who seemed to understand that grief doesn't follow a schedule, and that healing happens in its own time. I had absolutely no idea what they were really planning behind closed doors, or that the compassion they were showing was just the setup for something much more calculated and sinister than I could have imagined in my worst nightmares. Ryan and Jessica finally succeeded in getting pregnant 18 months after we moved in with my parents, and the entire family treated their announcement like the second coming of Christ himself had been announced to the world. My parents, who had been focused on helping Lily and me heal from our trauma and adjust to our new reality as a family of 2, suddenly had a new project that consumed all their attention, energy, and emotional investment. "Oh, Sarah, isn't it just wonderful?" my mother gushed the day Ryan came over with Jessica's positive pregnancy test, tears of joy streaming down her face as if she'd just received the most precious gift imaginable. "Our first grandchild is finally coming." I looked at Lily, who was sitting at the kitchen counter doing her math homework with careful concentration, and watched her head snap up with obvious confusion written across her 8-year-old features. "What am I, Mom?" Lily asked quietly, her pencil frozen halfway through a multiplication problem, her voice carrying that hurt tone children get when adults say things that don't make sense. My mother laughed in that dismissive way adults do when children ask inconvenient questions that expose uncomfortable truths. "You're our granddaughter, sweetie, of course you are, but this will be Ryan and Jessica's first baby, which makes it different and special in its own way." Even then, sitting at that kitchen table, watching my daughter's face fall as she processed what she'd just heard, I should have seen the warning signs flashing like neon lights in front of me. It was exactly like my childhood all over again. Ryan's achievements and milestones always took precedence over mine. And now his child would automatically take precedence over mine, simply by virtue of being his. But I was still struggling with my own grief, still grateful to have a roof over our heads and family support during such a vulnerable time, so I told myself that new babies were naturally exciting for grandparents who had been waiting years to experience that joy. Maybe having a little cousin would be good for Lily, who had been so quiet and withdrawn since losing her father, giving her someone to care about and focus on besides our shared sadness. Ryan's pregnancy announcement became the central focus of every family gathering, every conversation, every plan we made as a family unit moving forward. My parents attended every single doctor's appointment with Jessica, helped plan and fund an elaborate nursery in Ryan's house with custom furniture and designer decorations, and talked endlessly about baby names, cribs, strollers, and every tiny detail of the pregnancy, as if they were the ones expecting. Meanwhile, Lily's piano recitals and soccer games gradually became afterthoughts that were frequently skipped or forgotten entirely in favor of baby-related activities and appointments. "We'll try to make the next one," my father would say when Lily performed in the school talent show. But somehow there was always a doctor's appointment or baby shopping expedition that took priority over my daughter's activities and achievements. When baby Connor was born in early spring, the shift in family dynamics became impossible to ignore, even for someone as emotionally fragile as I was at the time. My parents transformed their formal dining room, the one with the beautiful hardwood floors and crystal chandelier where we'd eaten holiday meals for decades, into a fully equipped nursery for the times when Ryan would visit with Connor. They bought a $400 high chair that converted into a booster seat and would supposedly grow with the child, a state-of-the-art baby monitor system with video cameras and smartphone alerts that cost more than my monthly rent contribution, and enough educational toys and developmental tools to stock a small children's store. "We want Connor to be comfortable when he's here," my mother explained, when I questioned the expense, running her hands lovingly over the expensive crib bedding she'd ordered online from a boutique baby store. "And Ryan needs our support right now because he's new to parenting and learning how to take care of a baby's complex needs." I bit my tongue about the fact that I'd been a new parent once too, but had moved in during the worst period of my life and received a fraction of this attention, this financial support, this overwhelming enthusiasm and investment. The real change started when Connor was about 3 months old, and Ryan began dropping by unannounced, often during dinner time, always with some crisis that required immediate attention from our parents. "Connor's been fussy all day," he'd announce, walking into the kitchen with the baby without even greeting me first. His voice filled with the kind of panic that suggested Connor might be critically ill, rather than experiencing normal infant behavior. "I think he might be getting sick. Or maybe he's having an allergic reaction to something. Or maybe his sleep schedule is completely off, and we need to figure out what's wrong." My parents would drop everything. Literally, my father once left his dinner half-eaten on the plate to fuss over Connor, taking turns holding him, checking his temperature with 3 different thermometers, and discussing possible causes for his discomfort as if they were pediatricians consulting on a particularly difficult and mysterious case. Meanwhile, Lily would finish her homework alone at the kitchen table while I cleaned up the dinner dishes by myself, listening to the cooing and baby talk, coming from the living room where 3 adults devoted their complete attention to one infant's every need. One evening in late summer, Lily was practicing piano in the family room, working diligently on a piece she'd been learning for weeks in preparation for her school's fall recital. She'd been practicing for exactly 20 minutes, the amount of time her teacher had recommended for daily practice, when Ryan arrived with Connor, not bothering to knock before walking into the house like he owned it and had every right to interrupt whatever was happening. "Can you ask Lily to stop playing?" Ryan said to me, not even greeting me first. His voice carrying that entitled tone I remembered from childhood when he expected immediate compliance with his requests. "The noise is overstimulating for Connor, and Dr. Martinez says babies this age need a calm, quiet environment for proper neurological development." I looked at my daughter, who was concentrating so hard on getting the fingering right for a particularly difficult passage. Her little face scrunched up with determination and the kind of focus that showed how seriously she took her musical education. "She's been practicing for 20 minutes, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral, even though irritation was building in my chest. "She has a recital on Friday and needs to prepare properly." "Connor's sleep schedule is really important right now," Ryan continued, as if I hadn't spoken at all, bouncing the baby who seemed perfectly content and alert, showing no signs of distress from the piano music. "Dr. Martinez says babies this age need consistent routines and minimal disruption, especially auditory disruption that can interfere with their developing nervous systems." Lily, my mother, called from the living room, her voice carrying that tone of gentle but firm authority that brooked no argument. "Could you practice later, sweetheart? Connor needs quiet time for his development." I watched my daughter's face fall as she carefully closed the piano lid, gathered her sheet music without saying a word, and walked quietly to her room with her shoulders slumped in defeat. That was the first moment I felt a real flicker of anger cutting through my grief. But I pushed it down and told myself Ryan was just tired from new parenthood, that my parents were trying to help their son adjust to fatherhood, that this was all temporary while everyone learned to navigate the new family dynamic. But it wasn't temporary, and it wasn't innocent. And it got so much worse than I could have imagined as Connor became the center of everyone's universe, except mine. By the time Connor was 6 months old, Ryan's house had essentially become my parents' second home, and our house had become Ryan's second home, with his baby gear taking over the living room, kitchen, and every other common space in what was supposed to be our sanctuary. He and Jessica were there for dinner at least 3 times a week, leaving their dirty dishes for me to clean while my parents entertained Connor and discussed his developmental milestones as if he was the first baby ever born. Ryan's expensive stroller lived permanently in our front hallway. His diaper bag was stationed on the kitchen counter like it belonged there, and Jessica's breast pump parts were always drying on a towel next to our sink. Lily had been gradually pushed further and further into the background of what was supposed to be her home, her safe space after losing her father and the only stability she had left, in a world that had already taken so much from her. The favoritism that had defined my childhood was now being visited upon the next generation, and I was watching my daughter experience the same painful invisibility that had shaped my own relationship with my parents. The final straw came on a Thursday evening in October when I arrived home from a parent-teacher conference to find Lily sitting alone on the front porch steps, her school backpack and a small suitcase beside her in the gathering dusk. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" I asked, my heart rate immediately spiking as I took in the sight of my 8-year-old daughter sitting outside with her belongings like a refugee who'd been displaced from her own home. "It's getting cold, and why do you have a suitcase?" "Grandma said I needed to move my stuff downstairs tonight," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes, her voice carrying that flat, emotionless tone she'd developed when discussing anything related to Connor and the way our family had changed since his arrival. "She said Connor needs my room now because it's closer to Grandma and Grandpa's room for when he sleeps over, which is going to be happening a lot more often now that he's getting bigger." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my stomach, that feeling you get when you realize something terrible is happening, but you haven't fully processed what it means yet or how to respond to it. "Where exactly downstairs, Lily?" "The basement," she whispered, and I had to grip the porch railing to steady myself because I knew exactly what that meant and how completely unsuitable that space was for any child, let alone my grieving daughter. The basement in my parents' house was unfinished, with concrete floors that stayed cold year-round, exposed ceiling beams with hanging light bulbs, and one small window that barely opened and definitely wasn't legal for a bedroom according to any housing code. There was a persistent dampness that made everything smell musty and could trigger respiratory problems, and I'd noticed water stains in one corner during heavy rains that suggested flooding was a real possibility during Oregon's wet season. "Wait here," I told Lily, trying to keep my voice calm even though rage was building in my chest like a wildfire that threatened to consume everything in its path. I marched into the house and found my parents in the kitchen with Ryan and Jessica, Connor in his bouncy seat on the counter, while they all cooed over him like he was performing miracles by simply existing and breathing. "What's this about Lily moving to the basement?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice level even though I wanted to scream at all of them for making decisions about my daughter's living situation without consulting me. My father looked up with mild annoyance, as if I was interrupting something important by asking about my daughter's welfare and living conditions. "We need to make some adjustments to the living arrangements, Sarah. Connor is getting more mobile every day, and Ryan thinks it would be better if he had a proper room here for overnight visits and extended stays." "He's 6 months old," I pointed out, my voice getting sharper despite my efforts to stay calm and reasonable. "He's not exactly running marathons or climbing stairs or doing anything that requires a specific room configuration." "Sarah, don't be dramatic," my mother said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. That gesture I remembered from childhood whenever I questioned her decisions or tried to advocate for myself. "The basement is perfectly fine for a child Lily's age, who should be grateful to have any space at all. We put down some carpet remnants and hung curtains to make it cozy and comfortable." Ryan was bouncing Connor on his knee, not even participating in the conversation about displacing my daughter. Acting like this decision that would fundamentally affect my child's daily life and sense of security was none of his concern or responsibility. "Besides," he added without looking up from the baby, his voice carrying that same entitled tone I remembered from childhood, "Lily's old enough to adapt to changes and understand that babies have special needs. Connor needs stability and consistency in his environment for proper development." It was exactly like childhood. Ryan's needs always came first, and I was expected to be grateful for whatever was left over. Except now it was happening to my daughter. "Lily needs stability too," I said, my voice getting sharper despite my efforts to stay reasonable and avoid the family confrontation I could feel building. "She's 8 years old and she's been through enough upheaval in the past 2 years after losing her father and having her entire world turned upside down. The basement has everything she needs," my father said, with the kind of finality that indicated the decision was made and not up for discussion or negotiation. "A bed, a dresser, and plenty of privacy away from the household noise. Most kids would love to have their own space like that." I went downstairs to see what they'd done to create this perfect space for my daughter, and what I found made me physically sick to my stomach. They'd shoved Lily's twin bed into the far corner next to the water heater, which made a constant humming noise that would definitely interfere with sleep and relaxation. Her dresser was pushed against the wall with the water stains, where the musty smell was strongest and most unpleasant. The carpet remnants my mother had mentioned were old pieces of indoor-outdoor carpeting that didn't even cover half the concrete floor, leaving large patches of cold, bare cement that would be freezing against bare feet. The curtains were actually old bed sheets, hung on a tension rod in front of the one tiny window, which was at ground level and offered a lovely view of people's feet walking by on the sidewalk. But what really broke my heart was Lily's artwork and personal belongings that had made her upstairs room feel like home. For 2 years, she'd been decorating her space with drawings and paintings from school, photos of her and Mike from happier times, and a poster of her favorite singer that he'd bought her for her 7th birthday. Down here, none of it was hung up or displayed with any care or consideration for her emotional needs. Everything was just stacked in boxes on her dresser, like discarded items headed for a garage sale, as if her personal space and emotional connection to her surroundings were completely unimportant to the adults making decisions about her life. I found Lily still sitting on the porch when I came back upstairs, and I sat down beside her on the cold concrete steps, my heart breaking for what she was experiencing. "How do you feel about this move, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle, even though fury was coursing through my veins like molten lava. She was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on her backpack, with the kind of intense focus that meant she was thinking carefully about her words and how much truth she could safely share. "It smells funny down there, like wet socks and old boxes," she said finally, her voice small and resigned. "And it's really cold, even with the little space heater they put in there, but mostly—" She paused, glancing toward the house to make sure no one could hear her confession. "I don't think they want me here anymore, Mom, not since Connor came along. I think they wish it was just him and not me." just like when Uncle Ryan was little and got all the attention while you had to make do with whatever was left over. The matter-of-fact way she said it, without anger or self-pity, just resigned acceptance of a painful truth that connected to generational patterns she'd observed from family stories, broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. This child had already lost her father, the most important person in her young life, and now she was being made to feel unwanted and invisible in what was supposed to be our safe haven and sanctuary. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, except for the sounds of settling wood and distant traffic, I called my friend Jessica Williams, who teaches 4th grade at my school, and had been my rock since Mike died. We'd been working together for 5 years, and she knew me well enough to hear the strain and barely controlled anger in my voice immediately. "Jess, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said, pacing in my bedroom with the door closed and my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I'm being oversensitive about my family situation, or is something really wrong here that I need to address?" I told her everything in careful detail. The basement bedroom that wasn't fit for storage, Connor's elaborate nursery in the formal dining room, the way Lily was being treated like an inconvenience while Connor was treated like royalty, the constant dismissal of my daughter's needs in favor of the baby's every whim and developmental requirement. When I finished laying out the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and I could practically hear Jessica processing what I'd just described. "Sarah," she finally said, her voice careful but firm, with the authority of someone who'd seen enough family dysfunction in her teaching career. "What you're describing isn't normal family dynamics, not even close to acceptable. Your daughter is being systematically marginalized in favor of your brother's baby, and your parents are not just enabling this harmful behavior, they're actively orchestrating it." Hearing someone else say it out loud made the reality impossible to ignore any longer, and I felt something shift inside me, a clarity and determination I hadn't experienced since Mike's death gave me strength. "So what do I do about it?" "You need to start making plans to get out of there as soon as possible," Jessica said without hesitation, her voice taking on the protective tone she used when advocating for students in difficult situations. "And in the meantime, you need to document what's happening to Lily with photos and written records. If this situation gets ugly, and given what you've described about your family's behavior patterns, it probably will, you'll want comprehensive evidence of how your daughter was being treated." That night, I started keeping a detailed journal of every incident, every dismissive comment, every time Lily was told to accommodate Connor's needs while her own were completely ignored or dismissed as unimportant. I took photos of the basement room they'd prepared for her, documenting the water stains, the inadequate lighting, the concrete floors, and the general unsuitability of the space for any child, let alone one dealing with grief and trauma. I started researching rental properties in our area, checking my credit score, and calculating what I could realistically afford on my teacher's salary with careful budgeting. But I had no idea that the situation was actually much worse than simple favoritism and emotional neglect. And I was about to discover something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's motivations and true character. 3 weeks after Lily was banished to the basement like some unwanted piece of furniture, I started noticing financial inconsistencies that didn't make sense given what I knew about my parents' retirement income and careful spending habits. My parents, who had always been extremely cautious with money and complained about the cost of everything from groceries to gas prices, suddenly seemed to have unlimited funds for baby-related expenses and luxury items that had never been priorities before. The $400 high chair was just the beginning of what became a spending spree that would have impressed someone who'd just won the lottery. They bought an $800 premium stroller for their house, even though Ryan had a perfectly good stroller at home, a $300 top-of-the-line car seat for the times they babysat Connor, and enough designer baby clothes and educational toys to outfit triplets for their first year of life. My father, who had complained bitterly about the cost of replacing the kitchen faucet just 6 months earlier and had shopped for the cheapest possible option, didn't blink at spending $200 on a convertible crib for Connor's nursery that would supposedly grow with him until he was a toddler. "Grandparents are supposed to spoil their grandchildren," my mother said, when I commented on the latest delivery of expensive baby gear, waving her hand dismissively as if I was being petty and jealous for questioning their sudden generosity toward one particular grandchild. But here's what really caught my attention and started me asking uncomfortable questions. When Lily's school shoes wore completely through at the sole, leaving her walking on the ground through a hole in the rubber that was causing blisters on her feet, I asked my parents if they could help with the $60 replacement cost until my next paycheck came through. They hemmed and hawed about being on a fixed income and suggested I look for shoes at the thrift store or maybe ask Lily's paternal grandparents for financial help instead of relying on them for everything. The contrast between their willingness to spend hundreds on Connor's comfort and their reluctance to help with Lily's basic needs was so stark, it made me start questioning other financial decisions I'd observed but hadn't really processed. I started paying much closer attention to conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, lingering in hallways and listening through doors when I sensed something important was being discussed without my knowledge or input. Ryan was at the house constantly now, often during the day when I was at work teaching and couldn't monitor what was happening in my absence. And I began to suspect that major decisions about our living situation and financial arrangements were being made without consulting me. One evening, I came home early from school because of a staff meeting cancellation and found Ryan and my mother in the kitchen, speaking in low, urgent voices that immediately stopped when they saw me walk through the door. "Oh, Sarah, you're home early," my mother said, with that bright, artificial smile people use when they've been caught discussing something they shouldn't have been talking about. Ryan quickly turned his attention to Connor, who was in his bouncy seat on the counter, avoiding eye contact with me completely and suddenly becoming very interested in the baby's developmental milestones. I pretended to be looking for something in the refrigerator, moving items around to create noise while positioning myself where I could hear their conversation if it resumed. After a few minutes of awkward small talk about Connor's eating schedule and sleep patterns, they seemed to forget I was there and picked up where they'd left off in their private discussion. "Told Jessica we wouldn't need to worry about the mortgage payments anymore," Ryan was saying, in a voice barely above a whisper, glancing toward the doorway to make sure we were still alone. "Mom, you're absolutely sure about this arrangement we've worked out?" "Of course, sweetheart," my mother replied, her voice taking on that conspiratorial tone I remembered from childhood when she and my father were planning something they didn't want me to know about. "Sarah has that insurance money just sitting in the bank, doing nothing productive while we're all struggling to make ends meet. It's better for everyone if we manage it responsibly and make sure it benefits the whole family." I felt my blood turn to ice water in my veins as the implications of what I was hearing began to sink in, and I realized they were discussing my money, my future security, my daughter's inheritance. "But what if she finds out what we've been doing?" Ryan asked. And I could hear the anxiety creeping into his voice, even though he was trying to whisper. "What if she starts asking questions about where the money is going or wants to see bank statements?" "Finds out what?" my mother responded with a laugh that sounded forced, even to my hiding ears. "That we've been supporting her and Lily for almost 2 years while she gets back on her feet. She should be grateful we're helping her manage that money responsibly, instead of letting her make emotional decisions with it based on grief and inexperience." My hands were shaking as I quietly closed the refrigerator door and crept closer to the kitchen doorway, straining to hear every word of this conversation that was apparently about my financial future and my daughter's security. "Derek thinks maybe we should talk to her about it directly," Ryan continued, and I could hear him bouncing Connor nervously, the baby making soft cooing sounds that seemed incongruous with the serious nature of their discussion. "He says there could be legal issues if she ever decides to audit her accounts or hire a lawyer to look into her finances. Derek worries too much about legal technicalities and worst-case scenarios," my mother interrupted, with that dismissive tone she used when she'd already made up her mind about something and didn't want to hear opposing viewpoints. "Sarah doesn't understand financial planning or investment strategies the way we do. That money needs to benefit the whole family, not just her and Lily, especially when we're the ones providing housing and daily support." I had to grip the door frame to steady myself, as the full weight of what I was hearing crashed over me like a tsunami of betrayal and realization. They were talking about Mike's life insurance money he had paid premiums on for years specifically to ensure that Lily and I would be financially secure if something happened to him. Money that was meant to be our safety net and our future. Over the next few days, I started investigating more carefully and systematically, asking casual questions about financial matters and paying attention to details I'd been too grief-stricken and overwhelmed to notice before. I casually asked my father about some investment documents I'd seen on his desk, claiming I was interested in learning about their portfolio strategy for my own future financial planning and retirement savings. He was more than happy to share details about his recent windfall and improved financial situation, apparently forgetting that I knew exactly what his pension and Social Security payments amounted to each month. Ryan and Jessica were really struggling with their mortgage payments and facing possible foreclosure, he explained with obvious pride in his financial problem-solving skills. We had some unexpected income come our way recently, so we decided to help them out by paying off the whole balance in cash. No point in waiting until we're dead to pass on wealth to our children, right? Unexpected income. My parents, whose combined monthly income I knew to the penny from years of living in their house and helping with household expenses, had somehow come up with enough unexpected income to pay off a $200,000 mortgage in cash without affecting their lifestyle or retirement security. That weekend, I decided to check my own bank accounts for the first time since moving in with my parents, something I'd been too overwhelmed with grief and the daily challenges of single parenting to do regularly or carefully. What I found when I logged into my online banking portal made me physically sick to my stomach and left me staring at the computer screen in disbelief. The account where Mike's life insurance money had been deposited was supposed to contain close to $500,000, minus whatever I'd spent on Lily's legitimate expenses and my own basic needs over the past 2 years. Instead, it contained $89,000. I stared at the computer screen for a full 5 minutes, refreshing the page over and over, certain there had to be some kind of mistake with the bank's website or a technical error in their system. But the numbers didn't change, and the sick feeling in my stomach only got worse as I tried to figure out where more than $400,000 could have gone without my knowledge or authorization. I called the bank immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed their customer service number, and requested a complete transaction history for the past 2 years, with detailed information about every withdrawal and transfer. What the customer service representative told me sent me straight to a lawyer's office first thing Monday morning, because what my family had done wasn't just morally wrong and a betrayal of trust. It was criminal theft that could send them to prison. Attorney Margaret Chen had been recommended by Jessica's husband, who worked in insurance and dealt with lawyers regularly in his professional capacity. She specialized in family financial disputes and elder abuse cases, and when I walked into her office with my bank statements and a folder full of documents I'd started gathering, she took one look at the numbers and leaned back in her chair with an expression that told me she'd seen situations like this before. "Ms. Peterson, tell me exactly what's been happening in your household," she said, her voice professional but with an undertone of concern that made me feel like someone was finally taking my situation seriously. I laid out everything I'd discovered, the gradual changes in my parents' behavior, the expensive purchases for Connor that didn't match their supposed income, Ryan's mortgage being mysteriously paid off, the way Lily was being treated, and finally, the missing $400,000 from my account. Margaret reviewed the bank statements carefully, making notes on a yellow legal pad, and occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates, amounts, and my parents' access to my financial accounts. "Sarah, do your parents have legal access to this account?" she asked, looking up from the paperwork with a serious expression that told me this was a crucial question. "They helped me set up a new bank when we moved in with them," I admitted, feeling increasingly stupid and naive as I spoke. I was so overwhelmed with grief and couldn't handle financial decisions or paperwork, so I just signed whatever they put in front of me. They said it would be easier for them to help me manage my finances during the transition period while I was getting back on my feet emotionally. "And you gave them power of attorney over your financial affairs?" Margaret asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer from my previous explanations. I nodded, remembering how my father had explained that it was just a temporary measure, just until I got back on my feet emotionally and could handle things myself again without the fog of grief clouding my judgment. Margaret was quiet for several minutes, making more notes and occasionally referring back to the bank statements with increasing concern. "The good news is that there's a very clear paper trail here showing exactly where your money went," she finally said. "The bad news is that what we're looking at appears to be systematic theft of your assets, and your brother was not only aware of it, but was a direct beneficiary of the stolen funds. She explained that my parents had been moving money from my account to theirs in carefully calculated increments, designed to avoid triggering the bank's automatic reporting requirements for large transfers that might attract government attention. They'd then use that stolen money to pay off Ryan's mortgage, fund their new lifestyle of expensive baby gear and frequent restaurant meals, and essentially subsidize their support of Ryan's growing family at my expense and Lily's future security. The power of attorney document they had you sign isn't permanent, and it certainly doesn't give them the right to transfer substantial funds to third parties without your explicit written consent, Margaret continued, her voice taking on the firm tone of someone explaining legal facts that would hold up in court. What they've done is legally classified as financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which is a felony in this state with serious criminal penalties. What are my options for getting the money back? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer and learn how complicated this might become. First, we revoke their power of attorney immediately and freeze any remaining assets and accounts they can access, she said, already reaching for the appropriate legal forms. Then we can pursue both criminal charges for theft and civil recovery of the funds they've illegally transferred to themselves and your brother. I felt a mixture of relief and terror washing over me. Relief that I wasn't going crazy, that what I'd suspected was real and legally actionable, but terror at the thought of going to war with my own family and potentially destroying relationships that had shaped my entire life. The final piece of evidence came when I found legal consultation notes in my father's home office while looking for Lily's birth certificate. The consultation was about gaining guardianship of Lily in cases where the parent was deemed unfit, with notes about my depression, financial irresponsibility, and inability to provide stable housing. They'd been planning to take my daughter to maintain control over stolen money. That night, I called Margaret at her home number. I found something that changes everything, I told her. Legal consultation notes about gaining guardianship of Lily. They've been planning this since Connor was born, maybe longer. We're filing for emergency injunctive relief first thing Monday morning, Margaret said, her voice grimmer than I'd ever heard it. Don't let them know you found this, and don't be alone with them for extended periods until we can get legal protections in place. On Monday morning, I returned to my parents' house with Margaret and legal documents, revoking their power of attorney, along with copies of all the evidence we'd gathered and formal demands for the return of stolen money. I found my parents in the kitchen with Ryan and Connor, the scene so perfectly domestic that it made my anger burn even hotter. They were all sitting around the table sharing coffee and cooing over the baby like a happy family, completely unaware that their criminal enterprise was about to be exposed. "This is my attorney, Margaret Chen," I said, setting my folder of documents on the kitchen table with enough force to make the coffee cups rattle and get everyone's immediate attention. "We need to talk about the $400,000 you've stolen from my account over the past 18 months. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the kitchen clock ticking on the wall and Connor making soft baby sounds in his high chair. I watched the color drain from my father's face as the implications of what I'd just said began to sink in. And Ryan stopped bouncing Connor to stare at me with an expression of shock that looked genuine, though I was no longer sure I could trust my ability to read my family's emotions accurately. Margaret stepped forward with professional authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, your daughter has revoked the power of attorney you've been operating under. We have documentation showing unauthorized transfers totaling $411,000 from her account to yours, including a direct payment of $200,000 toward your son's mortgage." Ryan stood abruptly. I had no idea where that money actually came from. Mom and Dad told me they'd decided to help us with the mortgage as an early inheritance gift from their retirement savings. "Really?" I asked, my voice dripping with skepticism. "You thought it was just a coincidence that our parents suddenly had $200,000 in cash, right after I moved in here with $500,000 in insurance money?" The confrontation that followed revealed the full extent of their manipulation, justifications, and complete lack of remorse for what they'd done to me and Lily. When the dust settled and all the accusations had been made, I walked out of that house with my head held high, knowing I would never again allow my family to treat my daughter the way they had treated both of us. The legal battle that followed took 8 months of depositions, document reviews, and negotiations, but the evidence was so overwhelming that my parents' attorney eventually advised them to settle rather than face certain criminal conviction and potential prison time. My parents were forced to return $350,000 of the stolen money, though we had to accept that $50,000 could be considered legitimate payment for household expenses over the 2 years we lived there. Ryan was required to return the full $200,000 mortgage payment, which forced him to sell his house and downsize significantly when Jessica left him over the scandal and its impact on their reputation in the community. During those 8 months, Lily and I lived in a small rental house across town, far enough from my parents that we could begin healing without constant reminders of their betrayal. The house was modest but clean and bright, with 2 bedrooms and a small backyard where Lily could play without worrying about disturbing anyone or being told she was too loud. Most importantly, Lily had her own room again, with proper windows that opened and walls where she could hang her artwork and photos of her father. She started therapy with a counselor who specialized in helping children process family trauma, and I began working with a therapist who helped me understand how my grief had made me vulnerable to financial abuse and manipulation. By the time the legal case was resolved, Lily was genuinely thriving in ways I hadn't seen since before Mike's death. Her grades had improved dramatically. She'd joined the school choir and made several close friends, and she'd started taking piano lessons again with a teacher who recognized her natural talent and encouraged her musical development. She'd also developed a fierce sense of justice and a protective instinct that reminded me strongly of Mike's character and values. "Mom," she said one evening as we were cooking dinner together in our small but cozy kitchen, "I'm really glad we left Grandma and Grandpa's house when we did." "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because I like who I am when it's just us. I'm not trying to make myself invisible all the time, and I don't feel like I'm always doing something wrong just by existing." With the recovered money, I was able to make a substantial down payment on a small 3-bedroom house in an excellent school district, ensuring that Lily would have stability and continuity in her education. I also set up a new college fund for her that required both my signature and that of an independent trustee to access, making it impossible for anyone to steal from her future again. Additionally, I established a scholarship fund in Mike's name, specifically for children of fallen first responders, something that felt like the right way to honor his memory while helping other families facing similar tragedies. 3 years after we left my parents' house, Lily is 11 years old and one of the most confident, articulate children I know. She plays competitive soccer in a local league, continues with her piano lessons, and has started composing her own simple pieces, and has a close group of friends who appreciate her dry sense of humor and fierce loyalty. Most importantly, she talks about her father regularly, keeping his memory alive in healthy ways that celebrate his life, rather than mourning his absence. I've been promoted to assistant principal at my school, a position that comes with better hours, increased responsibility, and a salary that allows us to live comfortably without financial stress. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where family members are exploiting your grief, your vulnerability, or your children's well-being, please know that you're not alone and that there are people who will help you fight back. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if the people around you are telling you that you're being oversensitive or ungrateful. Document everything that happens, keep copies of all financial records, and don't be afraid to consult with professionals who can help you understand your legal options. Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is to walk away from people who refuse to see their worth and value. Family relationships should be based on mutual respect, consistent kindness, and genuine care for each other's well-being, not on obligation, guilt, or financial dependence. Real love doesn't come with conditions, and real family support doesn't require you to sacrifice your children's security for other people's comfort. Mike would be proud of the life Lily and I have built together, not because it's perfect or because we've achieved some impossible standard, but because it's built on honesty, mutual respect, and the understanding that we both deserve to be treated with dignity. If this story resonated with you or helped you feel less alone in your own family struggles, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have your own story of standing up to family toxicity or financial abuse, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, because we're all stronger when we know we're not alone in these experiences. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember, you are absolutely worth fighting for, and so are your children.